And what I'd like to do is give you some information on that great conflagration in the Haverhill Shoe District.
Sure.
Again, it was in 1882, and it took place on February 17th and 18th.
Well,
It originated in a block of wooden buildings occupied by the Endicott and Arnold sole leather dealers. The block was located about halfway up the north side of Washington Street between Washington Square and the railroad crossing. The fire was said to have started from an overheated stove that was discovered by a night watchman, a Mr. Weber, who rushed into the building in an attempt to extinguish the blaze, which was then only slight and could have been put out by a few buckets of water. Since there was no water available, Officer Weber sounded the alarm without delay. The first alarm was sounded at 11:45 p.m. on February 17th, and early accounts revealed that when firefighters arrived, the fire had gained little headway. The fire appeared to be under control when suddenly a hose line leading from a steam engine broke. A bitter cold, shrieking gale, high piercing wind was blowing from the northwest at the time, and less than 5 minutes after the hose broke, flames engulfed the entire building, which made further efforts by the firefighters almost useless. And sparks and burning embers were carried directly toward the center of the Shoe District, and pandemonium ensued. The fire whistle continued to sound as one after another of the handsome brick buildings burned to the ground, in many cases in less than 10 minutes. I have a lot that goes into more information on that. One thing that was interesting is they did a interview 31 years later with the chief at that time in 1882, was a Chief O. West. And I'd like to give you a little information here. Several facts and details never published about Haverhill's 1882 conflagration were recounted in an interview with former Fire Chief O.M. West on February 17th, 1913. And the 31st anniversary, that was the 31st anniversary of the disastrous fire. And the following reflects some of the interesting recollections. According to him, the fire department was not well organized. It had no modern fire apparatus with which to fight fires of any magnitude. There were no permanent firemen. Citizens and call firemen alike heeded the call of fire. The only permanent men employed were the drivers of the 3 steam engines, and the drivers were often involved in other lines of work for the city. At the time of the fire, one of Haverhill's steam fire engines was at the Amoskeag Fire Engine Works in Manchester, New Hampshire, and it was being overhauled, and an old steamer of little worth became a temporary replacement. And I would guess that it was probably the hose to that steam engine that burst, where they really got into trouble. The fire itself. The fire was discovered at 11:45 Friday night on February 17th, 1882, one of the coldest nights of the winter, and the temperature was 6 degrees below zero, and there was a gale blowing, and Chief West hurried from his home when he heard the alarm indicating a fire, and he did, however, see no other signs of a fire except smoke, but he came to the conclusion the smoke was coming from the steam engine. At Elm's Corner, he met a man who informed him that there had been a fire earlier in a pharmacy on Mount Washington, but it had been extinguished. It wasn't until he proceeded to Eaton's Corner and looked along Washington Street that Chief West saw the blaze, realizing that it was in a wooden block and that some buildings contain inflammable material. And so he immediately on his arrival at the scene, gave an order for additional help, and he actually had telegrams sent out to the fire department officials in nearby communities. And Lawrence was one of the communities, Newburyport was another community. In spite of the conflagration that nearly destroyed this small cottage shoe industry in 1882, by the 1890s, Haverhill shoe production, quantity and quality, had earned it the nickname Queen Slipper City of the world.
Did you have some other disasters that you might want to talk about?
This one took place about 6 years later in 1888, and not many people know about this. On the afternoon of January 10th, 1888, the Haverhill Fire Department responded to the city's worst train wreck involving loss of life. A Portland, Maine express of the Boston and Maine Railroad derailed in Bradford, bringing death to 14 and severely injuring 28 others. 9 persons were killed outright and 5 others died at the city hospitals within a week. The accident, one of the strangest in Boston and Maine Railroad history, was caused by a broken flange on a forward wheel of the train smoking car. The apparent flaw in workmanship that remained hidden and was overlooked in a routine check of the train before it left Boston was blamed for the tragedy. The broken wheel was responsible for derailing 4 cars as the train neared the Merrimack River Bridge outside the Bradford Depot. The first passenger car smashed into a huge water storage tank, releasing 100,000 gallons of water over the area. 2 of the fatalities were men in the railroad shed near the tank who were crushed when the building collapsed and probably drowned. The other killed and injured were train passengers, and Haverhill police and firefighters were called to the scene for search and rescue.
Right.
I do have a few photos of that accident that you might want to reflect later.
That'd be great.